My name is Jack Thompson, and I served in the United States Marine Corps during World War II. In early 1943, I found myself aboard a troop ship heading toward the Pacific Theater, a place I had only read about in newspapers. I was young, barely 19, filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. We had heard stories of the fierce battles fought on the islands scattered across the Pacific Ocean, and I knew we were heading into the heart of the conflict. We arrived at the island of Guadalcanal, where the battle had been raging for months. The heat was oppressive, and the jungle was dense and filled with unfamiliar sounds. We were immediately thrown into the thick of the fighting, joining the seasoned veterans who had been holding the line against the Japanese forces. The terrain was rugged, and the enemy was entrenched, using the jungle to their advantage. On my first patrol, the reality of war hit me hard. We were ambushed by a small Japanese unit. The crack of rifle fire and the shouts of my comrades echoed through the dense foliage. I saw my friend Billy, who had shared the bunk next to mine on the ship, go down with a bullet wound to his leg. We managed to repel the ambush, but the sight of Billy writhing in pain and the realization that any of us could be next stayed with me. Those nights on Guadalcanal were the hardest. The jungle came alive with the sounds of insects and distant gunfire, and every rustle of leaves made my heart race. Sleep was a luxury we could seldom afford, and when it came, it was often interrupted by sudden skirmishes or the need to move positions. Despite the exhaustion, we had to remain vigilant. The enemy was always near, and their tactics of sudden, nighttime attacks kept us on edge. 1943, the Battle for Tarawa. Later that year, our next objective was the island of Tarawa, a small coral atoll that was heavily fortified by the Japanese. The Battle for Tarawa was one of the most intense and brutal experiences of my life. As we approached the island, we faced heavy artillery and machine gun fire from the entrenched Japanese positions. The landing was chaotic. Our amphibious vehicles got stuck on the reefs, and we had to wade through waist-deep water under heavy fire to reach the shore. The noise was deafening. Explosions rocked the beach, and the air was filled with smoke and the screams of the wounded. I remember the shock of hitting the cold water and the struggle to keep my rifle dry as we pushed toward the shore. My heart pounded as bullets whipped past, and I saw men falling around me. Somehow I made it to the beach, where we found a semblance of cover behind the wreckage of our landing craft. The battle lasted for 3 days, but it felt like an eternity. The Japanese defenders fought to the last man, and we had to clear out bunkers and pillboxes one by one. The sights and sounds of battle were overwhelming: the deafening explosions, the cries of the wounded, and the relentless gunfire. We lost many good men, and the cost of taking the island was high. But the capture of Tarawa was a crucial victory, paving the way for our further advances in the Pacific. I remember one night in particular. We were huddled in a foxhole, trying to catch some sleep. My buddy Joe whispered about home, about the girl he planned to marry when he got back. We tried to keep each other's spirits up, sharing stories of better times, clinging to the hope that we would survive to see them again. The next day, Joe was hit by shrapnel from a grenade. I carried him back to the medics, but he didn't make it. His last words were about that girl back home. 1944, the Battle for Saipan. In mid-1944, we were part of the invasion force for Saipan in the Mariana Islands. The stakes were high. Capturing Saipan would bring us within bombing range of the Japanese home islands. The battle for Saipan was fierce and grueling. The Japanese fought with a tenacity we had come to expect, using the island's mountainous terrain to their advantage. We fought through dense jungles, up steep hills, and across open fields under relentless fire. The civilian population on Saipan complicated matters. Many were caught in the crossfire, and we had to navigate the horrors of war while trying to protect innocent lives. The battle culminated in a desperate Japanese banzai charge, where thousands of soldiers launched a suicidal attack. The chaos and carnage were unimaginable, but we held our ground and secured the island. I vividly remember the day of the banzai charge. The sheer number of enemy soldiers charging at us, screaming their battle cries, was terrifying. We formed a defensive line, and the fight was brutal and personal. I fired my rifle until it was too hot to hold, then grabbed a fallen comrade's weapon to continue. The bodies piled up, and the air was thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. We fought with everything we had, knowing that falling back was not an option. After the battle, the island was eerily silent. The ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, both friend and foe. The sight was haunting, a grim reminder of the cost of war. As we buried our dead, I couldn't help but think about the families back home, who would soon receive the dreaded telegrams. Each loss was a heavy blow, but we knew we had to press on. 1945, the battle for Iwo Jima. By 1945, we had become hardened veterans, having fought in several major battles. Our next objective was Iwo Jima, an island of strategic importance due to its airfields. The battle for Iwo Jima was one of the most iconic and brutal of the Pacific campaign. The Japanese had fortified the island with a network of tunnels and bunkers, and they were determined to defend it to the death. The black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima was treacherous, making movement difficult and providing little cover. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning sulfur. We faced withering fire from hidden positions as we advanced slowly, inch by inch. The iconic image of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi symbolized our determination and sacrifice, but the battle was far from over. The fighting on Iwo Jima was relentless. We had to root out the Japanese defenders from their fortified positions, often engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The cost was staggering, but the capture of Iwo Jima provided a critical base for our air operations against Japan. One night, while on patrol, we stumbled upon a cave filled with Japanese soldiers. The fight was brutal and up close, a chaotic mix of gunfire and hand-to-hand combat. In the midst of the melee, I came face to face with a young Japanese soldier. For a moment, we locked eyes, both realizing the shared humanity in the madness of war. But in that split second, survival instincts took over, and I pulled the trigger. It was a moment that would haunt me for years. The battle for Iwo Jima was a true test of our endurance and resolve. The enemy was deeply entrenched, and the network of tunnels they used allowed them to launch surprise attacks and then disappear. We had to clear these tunnels one by one, often using flamethrowers to flush out the defenders. It was a brutal, harrowing experience that left us physically and emotionally exhausted. Reflections. The war in the Pacific was a test of endurance, courage, and resilience. We faced a determined and resourceful enemy, fought in some of the most inhospitable terrain imaginable, and witnessed the horrors of war up close. The friendships forged in those battles were unbreakable, and the memories of those we lost will stay with me forever. After the war, I returned home, changed by my experiences. The Pacific campaign had left its mark on me, shaping my view of the world and my appreciation for peace. I often think back to the islands, the battles, and the brave men who fought alongside me. Their sacrifices were immense, and their bravery unparalleled. Returning home was a bittersweet experience. The joy of reuniting with family was tempered by the memories of those who didn't make it back. I struggled with the transition to civilian life, haunted by nightmares and flashbacks. The support of my family and fellow veterans helped me find a path forward, but the scars of war remained. I share my story with others, hoping to convey the realities of war and the importance of striving for a world where such conflicts are a thing of the past. The lessons learned in the heart of the Pacific continue to guide me, reminding me of the strength of the human spirit and the enduring hope for peace, legacy, and lessons learned. The legacy of my experience in the Pacific is a complex one. I am proud of the comradeship and bravery of my fellow soldiers, but I am also deeply troubled by the suffering and destruction we caused. The war taught me the importance of questioning authority and the dangers of blind obedience. It made me value peace, democracy, and human rights in a way I never had before. In the decades after the war, I saw our country struggle with the memories of the conflict and the impact it had on our veterans. I became involved in veteran organizations, working to support those who had served and to ensure that their sacrifices were not forgotten. We advocated for better treatment of returning soldiers, for the acknowledgement of their struggles, and for a commitment to preventing future wars. As I look back on my life, I hope that the lessons of our generation will not be forgotten. The horrors of the Pacific, the bravery,